I'm delighted to welcome you to the 29th Annual International Law and Religion Symposium at Brigham Young University. This year, our topic is Religion's Roles in Peacemaking. We'd like to make sure everyone who needs translation got a headset, and there's a list of channels just outside the door. And to let you know that on the program, there's a QR code that will give you all the details as well as bios of our presenters. We're so delighted to welcome this very distinguished group from around the world here tonight and look forward to hearing from our keynote speakers.
Good evening. It's lovely to be back to Utah. I want to begin by acknowledging the impressive nature of this gathering and congratulations on the 29th Symposium. President Wharton, thank you for being here and for the inspiring words that you shared with us earlier. I'd like to also express my gratitude to Professors Brett Sharps, Paul Carey, Elizabeth Clark, for inviting me to speak at this symposium. It's an honor to share the stage with you, Professor Pilfat. Thank you for your educational presentation. It's been a pleasure serving alongside of Brett, Paul, for the Religious Liberty Initiative at Notre Dame Law School. Thank you both for your leadership advancing religious freedom around the world. As mentioned in as Elizabeth mentioned in the introduction, I'm currently serving as the chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, but today I'm speaking in my personal capacity. The issue of religious liberty is not mere rallying cry or slogan. It is a matter of life and death. For many of those gathered here today, we may share a common belief in a creator. As such, we believe human beings have dignity, have worth, and of value. The greatest threat for these principles and religious freedom today is the Chinese Communist Party. China claims that its constitution recognizes freedom of religion. In reality, adherent to any religious beliefs resulting in persecution or restriction to the point of being unable to practice faith genuinely. Religion is treated with hostility because it presents an enormous threat. The CCP sees the potential for religion to undermine the regime's hold on power. Any means are justifiable in eliminating the threat. For example, Chinese officials have likened belief in Islam to mental illness and thought viruses. They also manifested that the Quran and Bible should be rewritten to reflect socialist characteristics. The Abrahamic faith, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, are particularly problematic for Communist Party officials. These are viewed as hostile Western influence. Followers are required to give extensive displays of loyalty to the Chinese state. In fact, the very idea of faith or conscience and freedom to use one's mind and heart to make an independent choice is antithetical to party ideology. So the regime intends to wipe out or transform those who are loyal to their creator or conscience. The CCP has set itself against the very nature of God, humanity, and freedom of belief and thought. The most glaring example of this has been the Uyghur genocide, which disturbingly it's in 6th year. In fact, the horrific atrocities carried out against the Uyghur people are so damaging that it is hard to see a path forward. For those who might be unfamiliar, let me provide some context of the hell on earth that the Chinese government has created for the Uyghur people today. It started as stories of disappearance that quickly multiplied in the Uyghur homeland that China calls Xinjiang, meaning new territory. Uyghurs call their homeland East Turkestan, the historical name that reflects its political history and roots. In 2017, more and more Uyghurs living outside of China received phone calls from loved ones directing them not to call again and not to come back under any circumstances. The disappearances become more widespread. Leaked Chinese government documents reveal that 17,000 were rounded up just over 10 days in one county alone. We now know there have been quotas that local authorities were forced to fulfill. The first disappeared were the intellectuals, professionals, societal and religious leaders. It continued with artists, musicians, custodians of Uyghur cultural heritage. The US government estimated that 2 to 3 million Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims have been swept into industrial-scale concentration camps that the world has not seen since the Holocaust era. Initially, when we confronted, the Chinese regime denied the existence of those camps. Then they changed the story, said they were vocational training centers. Contrary to the claims, these re-education facilities detainees have been subject to torture, systematic rape, food and water deprivation, and constant political indoctrination. They have been forced to deny God and pledge loyalty to the Communist Party. A Uyghur camp survivor, Zumret Dawud, whom I profiled in my book, shared that during her time in the camps, they were forced to chant that Xi Jinping was their new God. The so-called re-educations forcing a person to sit through hours and days and months of patriotic education. This includes lectures where history has been rewritten to dictate a reality never existed. Renouncing any religious beliefs or political dissent, replacing these ideas with quote-unquote Xi Jinping thoughts. Forcing you to recognize that everything you have in this life because of the Communist Party, that you're indebted to the motherland for the prosperous and happy life that you were given. The Communist Party must be the savior. By stripping you of your liberty, they create an environment in which they can brainwash you into parroting Chinese communist propaganda. In essence, re-education is human re-engineering. As a parent myself, one of the most horrifying and heartbreaking aspects of the atrocities involves deliberate destruction of Uyghur families. Many parents abroad lost touch with family members only to discover videos of their children on Chinese social media. These videos show children who have been stolen from their parents being placed in what the CCP calls boarding schools. These children are prompted by their Chinese instructors to shout back perfectly timed, politically correct answers. It is like they're in communist boot camp with no indication that they can still speak their mother language. Minimum estimate shows that at least 800,000 Uyghur children have been forcibly separated from their families in this brutal manner. 800,000 children who are deprived of their parents' love. 800,000 children being forced to memorize carefully crafted slogans, extol the party's virtues, praise the men that ripped them from their families. 800,000, let this sink in. That is more than the population in our nation's capital. Chinese officials delivered on their promises to, quote, break their lineage, break their roots, break their connections, break their origins. These so-called boarding schools clearly indicate that CCP is committing genocide against children. The BBC recently released reporting on the Chinese police files that also contains countless photos of detainees, including men, children, women, and elderly. In these photos, the faces of children stare back at the camera, heads shaved, fear in their eyes. This level of evil should clarify that we're dealing with a state actor that is hostile to the values of humanity. And that is not the only evil being carried out by the CCP. The ongoing policies of forced abortion, forced sterilization resulted in staggering 60% drop in the birth rate in just 2 years. Survivors have testified to being forced to take strange medications that affected their fertility and caused foggy mental state. Camp survivors have testified to horrifying sexual violence in the camps, including women being raped by camp guards and subject to gang rape. There are horrifying stories of young women who disappeared after such encounters, never to be heard again. So far, I have spoken mostly about those people who have been taken to the camps, but millions also suffering outside the camps. Humiliation, dehumanization continue even for those who are not detained. Chinese cadres, reportedly at least 1 million of them, have been assigned to live in the Uyghur homes, even sleep in their beds, and eating with them uninvited. These cadres write reports on the family's behavior. They note if they engage in religious practices, including teaching children religious values, or if they abstain from drinking alcohol. During the pandemic, many Han Chinese cadres have also been locked down with Uyghur women. This is occurring while in other regions, family members were separated and visits from friends were banned. Along with monitoring any signs of religious practice, any potential lack of nationalist enthusiasm for the party may also be reported. But there are many other state policies that are also stopping the formation of new families. The Uyghurs of marriageable age are locked in prison camps or forced labor facilities. Uyghur women being forced to marry Han Chinese men, and they cannot say no. If they refuse, their family members will be labeled as extremists who resist what the CCP calls ethnic harmony. From the cradle to the grave, the intent has been made clear. Assimilate to Han Chinese ethnic identity as defined by the Communist Chinese Party, or die. But dying is not also done freely. Uyghur holy sites and graveyards have been desecrated and destroyed. Many people have found their loved ones' physical remains uprooted and placed in the grave sites with numbers rather than names. Mourning is also restricted. Why does this matter for the rest of the world? The methods used to carry out this genocide will not stop with the Uyghurs. The CCP has used Uyghurs' predominantly Muslim identity as a pretext for genocide. The role of high-tech and artificial intelligence in this cannot be understated. The Uyghurs' phones are monitored for foreign apps, as well as for reference to religion or any foreign context. The results are cross-checked with the QR codes posted on the doors of Uyghur homes. We have already seen these tactics expanding throughout China during the pandemic. This rapidly built system of digital authoritarianism is more expensive and frightening than the world has realized. Technology and economic development are supposed to foster freedom and prosperity. They should improve our lives. But the Chinese progress in science and technology and economic development are not moral progress. On the contrary, the Chinese technology enables, facilitates collective punishment and enslavement of vulnerable population, particularly religious minorities. These technologies are being actively exported for misuse by other authoritarian regimes. As of 2020, more than 80 countries have imported and adopted Chinese surveillance techniques and equipment. In order to create a world in which religious liberty flourishes, we must recognize the darkness we're fighting against. We cannot, in our own modern age, say we did not know or don't know. As the title of my recent book, No Escape, suggests, we cannot ignore or escape from the brutal realities of the existential threat that Communist China poses to the democratic system, freedom, and liberal values. Even I have not been able to entirely escape the Chinese persecution myself, despite being an American citizen and now a US official. Since my arrival to the United States in 1995, I have been only able to spend a few months with my parents because of China's retaliation against my human rights work. I have not seen my mother since 2004, and it is unlikely that I will see her again in this life. The last time I saw my father was in 2004. He passed away in April. It pains me to share that I could not carry my father's casket or be with my mother to mourn. This is because I was sanctioned by China for my policy advocacy to stop the Uyghur genocide. Now the Chinese authorities won't permit my mother to leave the country despite losing her husband recently. They won't allow her to reunite with her 5 American grandchildren. I still might be considered more fortunate than many others who don't even know the whereabouts of their loved ones. I hope my own story illustrates for you that the people swept up in this Orwellian nightmare are not just statistics. These are real people. They are my people. They're my friends, family, and my parents. What are the implications of China's atrocities for future? I don't have to speak the obvious truths to those gathered here. We have seen what CCP is doing to the Uyghur people. We know what the Chinese regime is doing to the people of Hong Kong. and what they will be willing to do to their own people, as the case of Shanghai and other cities, in the name of political goal. We can be certain that the Chinese leaders will pursue the same for the people of Taiwan. The Uyghur people have already paid an enormous price for the international community's appeasement approach and inadequate determination to confront authoritarianism. For decades, the international community has operated under the naive belief that the Chinese regime will reform over time. Even now, with all we know and learn, much of the global communities cannot accept the brutal reality staring us in the face. By prioritizing cooperation with the genocidal regime over human rights, our leaders have sent the signal to the communist leadership in Beijing and to other hostile state actors that such crimes can be carried out with impunity. The current situation in China is not developing because of one person, a villain figure like Xi Jinping. Rather, the repression at home and increased aggression and assertiveness abroad are long-standing CCP consensus. The party is pursuing the fulfillment of its envisioned destiny. So we cannot so naive to assume that if Xi Jinping is gone, the lives of the persecuted religious minorities in China or others would be better. Whether we like it or not, this is a long-term battle for freedom and against evil that we are already engaged in. But we're not equipped to fight this battle unless we can address our own connection to the problem. Even as the regime has expanded its brutal crackdown on people of faith, the West has carried out business as usual. This has empowered the CCP to grow more assertive and belligerent, to commit human rights abuses with impunity. China continues to profit from Uyghurs' slave labor. The US government and several other governments around the world have rightfully recognized atrocities carried out by the CCP against the Uyghur people as genocide and crimes against humanity. Yet the US companies, in contradiction to American values and in opposition to the values of humanity, through their economic ties with Xinjiang-based entities, they have helped to create a reliance on the goods produced by slave labor. These corporations are touting progress, causes, and utilizing catchphrases that an American consumer demographic is used to hearing. Meanwhile, they are concealing their complicity in genocide and modern-day slavery. The textile industry in particular has been heavily implicated. This slavery also involves polysilicon production in the solar panel supply chain. Many of these products are exported to the United States and Europe. In pursuit of economic opportunities, millions of innocent people have been sacrificed. Complicity in genocide destroys our own souls. I cannot imagine a future darker than the world dominated by the Chinese Communist regime with its continuing war on religious freedom and human rights. Stability will never be possible until this threat is addressed. Our current approach to this problem has failed. If we want to stop such ongoing persecution and continue to fail to identify and prevent atrocities, there can never be a peace or religious freedom. So where do we go from here? We should present examples of ignoring the early warning signs of atrocity crimes. Nigeria and India comes to mind. Activists have cried out for attention for years on worsening human rights abuses in China, and the international community still hasn't taken it seriously. To date, only 9 out of over 150 state parties to the Genocide Convention have formally given China's atrocities against Uyghurs a proper name. To prevent such stains on humanity and to establish peace and stability, we need to pay close attention and act before situations turn into war or full-swing genocide. The Elie Wiesel Act calls the United States government to pursue a strategy to identify, prevent, and respond to atrocities in coordination with international civil society and local partners. In conclusion, I wanted to reiterate that religious freedom abuses cannot go unchallenged, whether caused by the government or inaction by the government. Research has found that the countries that uphold religious freedom have more vibrant and democratic political institutions, rising economic and social well-being, diminished tension and violence, and greater stability. Nations that trample on or fail to protect Fundamental human rights, including religious freedom, provide fertile grounds for poverty and insecurity. They create conditions for war, terrorism, violence, and breeding grounds for extremism. True peace building starts with accountability. What has been stolen from me and from my fellow Uyghurs cannot be returned to us. An entire ethnic group has had their lives utterly destroyed. It is hard to see how it can be made right. My call to you today is this. This regime must be stopped. If not for the Uyghurs, then for the future of humanity. Thank you very much again for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you both. We're grateful for the sobering and thoughtful introduction to our conference and for your comments, both of you. At this point, we'd like to dismiss the gathering. There'll be a reception downstairs. You're welcome to come and join us and talk with panelists and others. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. Thank you.